Man tries to reach out to save a lion with a tumor, but what the lion does is shocking. The lion's massive head rested against the red earth beside the waterhole. But it was the unnatural stillness of his powerful frame that first caught Dr. Sarah Chen's attention as she approached the familiar watering site during her morning veterinary rounds. Even from 50 meters away, she could see the grotesque bulge protruding from the left side of his neck. A growth roughly the size of a cantaloupe that distorted the noble lines of his profile and explained why this apex predator lay motionless. While other animals came and went from the life-giving water without fear, Sarah had been treating wildlife in the Masai Mara for 8 years, long enough to recognize the particular way animals carried themselves when pain became their constant companion. This lion's breathing was visibly labored, his massive ribcage rising and falling with effort that spoke of airways, partially blocked by the tumor's relentless expansion. Each inhalation seemed to require conscious decision, rather than the automatic rhythm that should have powered such a magnificent creature. The veterinarian moved closer, with the careful steps of someone who understood that even a suffering predator remained dangerous, her trained eyes cataloging details that painted an increasingly grim picture. The lion's golden coat had lost its lustrous shine. Dulled by the metabolic demands of fighting a battle his body was slowly losing. His once thick mane, which should have been the crown of his dominance, appeared patchy and unkempt, groomed poorly by paws that probably ached to lift toward his swollen neck. Most telling was the way he positioned himself close enough to the waterhole to drink when absolutely necessary, but far enough from the established pride territories to avoid challenges he could no longer answer. This was the behavior of a king in exile, driven from his throne, not by a younger rival, but by an enemy that grew within his own flesh. Sarah estimated his age at perhaps 12 years, still within his prime, if not for the malignant growth that was stealing his strength day by day. The tumor itself was a mottled, purple-black mass that had stretched the skin to its limits, creating an obscene contrast against the tawny perfection of his natural coloring. Sarah could see where the growth pressed against major blood vessels and airways, understanding now why each breath came as a conscious effort, rather than an instinctive function. The mass appeared to have been growing for months, possibly longer, reaching the point where surgical intervention would be incredibly complex and dangerous. As Sarah continued her careful approach, the lion's amber eyes tracked her movement with the weary awareness of an animal that had learned to conserve energy for only the most essential responses. There was no aggression in his gaze, no territorial warning, only the profound exhaustion of a creature whose body had become both fortress and prison. His ears swiveled, occasionally toward distant sounds, but his head remained pressed to the earth as if lifting it required more strength than he could spare. "Easy there, old king," Sarah whispered, her voice carrying the respect she felt for this suffering monarch. The morning sun climbed higher above the acacia trees, casting longer shadows across the waterhole, where time itself seemed to be running out for one of nature's most magnificent creations. Each labored breath, a countdown toward an ending that felt both inevitable and heartbreaking. Sarah returned to her field vehicle with the measured urgency of someone who had learned to balance hope against harsh realities, her mind already calculating the complex logistics of what she was about to attempt. The tranquilizer kit contained enough ketamine-medetomidine combination to safely sedate a lion of his estimated weight, but the tumor's effect on his respiratory system made even standard dosages dangerous. Each piece of equipment she gathered carried the weight of a decision that could mean the difference between salvation and an unintended mercy killing. The approach would need to be executed with surgical precision, reading every nuance of the lion's body language to determine whether he perceived her as a threat worth his remaining energy to repel. Sarah loaded the dart gun with deliberate care, double-checking the dosage calculations that would need to account for his weakened condition, while still providing sufficient sedation for a safe examination. Her medical kit contained antibiotics, anti-inflammatory medications, and surgical supplies, though she harbored no illusions about what could realistically be accomplished under field conditions, as she began her careful advance across the 30 meters of open ground between her vehicle and the water. Sarah found herself moving in a pattern that felt almost ritualistic, each step measured to communicate non-aggression while maintaining her ability to retreat if necessary. The lion's amber eyes tracked her progress with an alertness that surprised her, given his obvious suffering. There was something in that steady gaze that went beyond the usual wariness of a wild predator, and quality of assessment that seemed almost collaborative rather than defensive. The great cat's breathing remained labored, but his posture shifted subtly as Sarah drew closer, not into the coiled tension of a creature preparing to strike, but rather into a more upright position that suggested active engagement with her presence. His massive paws remained planted firmly on the earth, but his head lifted slightly from its resting position, the movement clearly costing him energy he could ill afford to spend on anything but survival. Sarah paused at 20 meters, allowing both of them to take the measure of this unprecedented situation. The lion's ears swiveled forward, not flattened against his skull in aggression or fear, but pricked with what appeared to be curiosity about her intentions. His tail lay still beside his haunches, another indicator that he was not preparing for either flight or attack. Despite being approached by a species that represented everything dangerous about the human presence in his world, the tumor's grotesque bulk was even more apparent at this closer distance, distorting the left side of his neck in ways that made it difficult to imagine how he continued to draw breath at all. Yet those golden eyes remained steady and intelligent, seeming to evaluate Sarah's movements with a sophistication that transcended simple animal instinct. There was something in his gaze that reminded her why some cultures had attributed supernatural wisdom to lions, a depth of awareness that felt almost like recognition. Sarah raised the dart gun slowly, telegraphing her movements in the way one might with a domestic animal, though she understood the absurdity of applying such logic to a wild lion. The weapon's weight felt heavier than usual as she considered the profound trust this moment required from both species. The lion trusting that this approaching human meant healing rather than harm, and Sarah trusting that his apparent calmness was genuine rather than the deceptive stillness that sometimes preceded a predator's final charge. "Just trying to help you, old friend," she whispered, her voice carrying across the diminishing distance between them. The lion's response was to shift his weight slightly, accommodating her presence in a way that defied every principle of wild animal behavior she had learned during her years of practice. The lion's decision came without warning, his massive frame rising from the earth with a slow deliberation that defied every expectation Sarah had formed during her approach. The movement clearly cost him tremendous effort, his legs trembling under the combined weight of his body and the tumor that had claimed so much of his strength. But there was unmistakable purpose in the way he positioned himself upright. His amber eyes found hers across the diminishing distance, holding her gaze for a long moment before he turned away from the waterhole and began walking toward a dense thicket of wait-a-bit thorns, 50 meters to the east. Sarah lowered the dart gun, her medical training warring with an intuition that told her something profound was unfolding beyond her understanding of normal animal behavior. The lion moved with painful slowness, each step requiring visible effort. as he navigated around the scattered boulders and fallen logs that dotted the landscape. But most remarkable was the way he paused, every few meters, to look back at her, his great head turning with obvious difficulty to ensure she was following his labored progress across the savanna. The thicket he approached was the kind of natural fortress that predators often chose for denning, its thorny walls providing protection from rivals and scavengers, while offering multiple escape routes through the intertwined branches. As they drew closer, Sarah began to hear the soft sounds that explained everything: the gentle mewing of very young cubs and the low, reassuring rumbles of their mother. The lion had been guarding his family, enduring his own agony at a distance that would not attract threats to the most vulnerable members of his pride. The revelation struck Sarah with the force of understanding why this magnificent creature had seemed so resigned to her approach. He had been waiting, perhaps hoping that the human who had appeared at his waterhole might possess the power to help not just him, but the lioness and cubs hidden within the thorny sanctuary. As if responding to their arrival, a golden head emerged from the shadows of the thicket, the lion's mate, her own condition immediately apparent in the way. She held her left front paw elevated, and the visible wounds along her flank that spoke of a recent encounter with rival lions, or perhaps hyenas, too. Tiny cubs tumbled into view behind their mother, their spotted coats and oversized paws marking them as no more than a few weeks old. They mewed softly as they pressed against their father's legs, oblivious to the tumor that was slowly claiming his life, seeing only the protector who had stood vigil over their first precious weeks of existence. "You've been taking care of them all along," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with recognition of the sacrifice she was witnessing. The evening light painted the thorn thicket gold as the lion settled beside his family, his duty finally shared with someone who might help carry the weight of love that had kept him fighting longer than his body should have allowed.